Mandela was a sellout. I mean, that's just people who say that, it's loose talk and it's frankly rubbish. The struggle of apartheid was to get land owned by the people who live on it. South Africa, people forget, is a federation. Let each community decide for itself.
Welcome to Through the Liberty Lens with Louw. Welcome, Leon.
It's good to be with you and with Tim and the viewers and listeners.
We welcome Tim Cohen, the author of the book Louw, A Legacy of Solutions, to the program. Hi, Tim.
Hello. How's it, Tom? Hi, Leon.
Yeah, good to see you and be with you.
Well,
Sure.
I get confused because the book's called Louw, A Legacy of Solutions, but it's not your book, is it? It's Tim's book.
No, it's Tim's book, and when we disagreed with each other, he kept reminding me, he said, listen, you must understand it's my book, not yours.
Is that true, Tim?
Yes, but unfortunately we never disagreed, so that solved that problem. And it's really Leon's book, to be honest. It's really about his life. I'm just the scribe in this process.
Tim, what drew you to writing a book about one of the world's best-known advocates of individual liberty and free markets? You're a journalist. Are you a free marketeer as well? We actually discussed this, in the process of writing a book, as you can imagine. Leon, I think, said that I'm a free marketeer in drag. I am actually, but I don't look like it. But I would go further. I mean, I'm very supportive of classical liberalism in a sort of broad and ideological kind of way. So that was one of the things that seemed appropriate about the book. I mean, and really, I did the book because Leon asked me to. Well, I was just about to
Leon
ask.
asks you to do something, then you just do it. You know what I mean? There's no sort of like choice involved.
That was my next question. Did you ask Tim, or did Tim ask you?
No. It was actually another close friend, Bon Posmo, who was adamant that it had to be written and asked who to recommend, and Tim was the one we recommended, and he agreed, but he had no choice, really. He's correct about that, yes. I'm all for freedom except where I require otherwise.
Why did the book have to be written, Tim?
I think for a lot of reasons. It was an interesting process because it did, sort of mutate and develop as we discussed it. Because we didn't really know where we were going, so we just started talking. And we actually started, talking about things that the Free Market Foundation had done, rather than, at the beginning of Leon's life, or which would have been a more logical place to begin. But the central motivation really was that Bon Posmo was just outraged at how Leon had been treated. In the breakup of the old Free Market Foundation, and he wanted somebody to record, what actually happened. And we did do that, but we also sort of, just as we discussed things, sort of new priorities took over. I was very surprised and very interested in, the Constitution, how Leon's history with the existing Constitution, because I just thought, for not only for us, but for the classical liberals in general, how South Africa was changing was obviously very interesting, and also, of course, South Africa's in a bit of an impasse, so we need more solutions. So that sort of cropped up as a topic too. So that's what it needed. It didn't specify that it definitely needed to be written for a singular reason. There were a lot of different reasons, and it was really fun going through them all. Yeah.
And one of them is your departure from the Free Market Foundation, Leon, an organization which you founded, I think, the year after I was born.
Yes, but just before we get on to that, I will in a sec. Tim was fabulous in the way he sort of hijacked the process and said, look, what's more important is solutions. What would you do about the problems currently facing South Africa? And since in the past I seem to have been reasonably good, internationally recognized as reasonably good at producing solutions to economic problems, not just here but elsewhere in the world. And what happened at the Free Market Foundation is most unfortunate. Yes, I created it. With the assistance of Raymond Parsons, who was then the head of the Chamber of Business in South Africa, then called ASSOCOM, Association of Chambers of Commerce. And then later on, 1995, a few other people came in, and that's what now, dishonestly and misrepresenting the past, trying to erase me from the history of my organization that I created. So yes, unfortunately, there was stuff there that I didn't like to see, what was going on, the spending of money, the diversion of policies from making policies to being politically active and aligned. And so it was basically hijacked and went off in the wrong direction. So I left and started a new organization that's another pure, what the Free Market Foundation was for 50 years, is now again and called the Freedom Foundation.
You allude to the mixing of politics and policy as being a no-no for you.
Yes. For example, when the then chairman of the Free Market Foundation started virulent attacks on the ANC, calling it corrupt as a political party, openly supporting another political party, I just said this is not the way to influence the course of events. The way to influence the course of events is to persuade everybody, regardless of their politics, to adopt good policies. And this is what Tim, to his great credit, kept nudging me towards. How would you sell, for example, free market policies to people who want black economic empowerment? How would you sell free market policies to people who want expropriation of land without compensation? How do you talk to somebody? And I do that. I do that with the Freedom Founder, the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, Malema and co, with the Mkonto, people who are nominally, let's say, anti-market. You'd be very surprised at how well I can get on with these people because I respect and understand why they have their views, and I think I can relate to how maybe they can achieve their goals in a better way. This is my history, my legacy, by the way. I went from being very staunchly pro-apartheid, I considered as a teenager Verwoerd to be something.
You've had quite a journey, eh?
And then I ended up being a communist, and suddenly I thought this is all evil. And I was a Sunday school teacher. Then as a communist, you supposedly have to adopt atheism. And then I decided I didn't want to have views on that. And then I ended up being a libertarian as a result of seeing poor people, informal traders, being brutalized by the apartheid police, as they are now by the new South Africa police. It absolutely astounds me that we're in the 30 years into the new South Africa and the same brutality against the same poor, almost exclusively black people takes place. And I'm it appalls me, and I dedicate my life to fighting against it.
Tim, does it impress you as much as it impresses me, Leon's ability to get along with politicians and not talk badly about them?
It certainly does. Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, and it's important in a wider in a sense wider than politics. Because essentially it seeks out what people really are looking for. Because and this is something that really, in the process of writing the book, Leon really convinced me about, which is, it's easy to disagree with people who want, compensation without, want expropriation without compensation. But what they're really looking for is a more fair system. That's the root behind the desire. So the question is not really what are the political aims, but what underlies those political aims, and those are very common in across society. So it's not the route to achieving them in politics might be different, but in economics and in philosophy, you should be trying to find common ground, not trying to find differences. I think,
Yeah. Did
sorry, yeah, and that's one of Leon's legacies, I think.
Did it rub off on you?
Oh, sure, yeah. Although I have to say, I'm a much more political person. I've been involved in, in sort of, and I don't have Leon's patience. I get angry in the shower, and then I write stuff and put it in the newspaper. That's my kind of modus operandi, and then everyone ignores it, and that's fine with me. This whole process was an education for me, actually.
The first section of the book, Democracy Arrives, post-transition battles, and what I wanted to really ask was Leon's obsession with the canton system. That came out?
Yes. Freedom, after all, is really devolving power to the individual. So it's a kind of extreme version, a reductio ad absurdum version of the canton system or of federation or confederation. South Africa, people forget, is a federation.
Can I stop you for a second and just reverse to canton system? Because there will be people who are familiar with that term, but there'll be a lot of people that have got no idea what the canton system is. And this has been part of your journey for a while.
Yes, there are various parts of the world where the third or lowest level of government, what we would call, for example, towns or cities or even suburbs, would be called cantons. And what happens in Switzerland, which is called the canton system, is where power is devolved from the central government so fantastically low to local communities that nobody in Switzerland knows or cares who the president is. I bet you don't. I'm here with two of the most educated people in the world, and if I say to you...
Is it Ferrero Rocher? No.
Have you ever heard of a Swiss president? Have you ever known whether Switzerland has a president or a prime minister?
No.
And the answer is the central government in Switzerland is so unimportant that if you ask a Swiss person who's your president, they will give you a name, but what they mean is the president of their canton, not the president of the country. That they will know, because that's the most important level of government for them. So what we said is that in any country that is divided and conflict-ridden, as South Africa was and is increasingly, unfortunately so, is devolve power to the communities so that you no longer have to have a fight about which version of history you teach at school, or about what the zoning laws are of a particular community. So the zoning laws of Bomanango can be different from the zoning laws of Sea Point, for example, or Constantia. Let each community decide for itself. And then you don't have to have a fight. You don't have to battle it out. So that's the purpose of the canton system. Pass power down to the community, so that in Switzerland, for example, you literally will have the canton of Zug, Z-U-G, just down the road from Zurich, which is the biggest and best-known city and a canton. A city is a canton. And in Zug, for example, they have strict censorship. So no pornography, no Playboys in those days, no whatever. But in Zurich, it's very libertine. So you have Needle Park, where people sit around having drugs in the park, and welfare workers come around and look after them. But you would never get that literally 30k down the road in Zug. So in the diversity from one community to another is just absolutely enormous, as it is in real federations in America. The rape laws and the sentences for crimes and so on, and ages of consent even. You know, everyone talks about stuff in Epstein's case being underage people. Well, what does that mean? Because in some states the age is 16, in others it's 18, in some countries it's 14 or 12, and and then in other countries it will be 21 for women, for example. So these things vary from local community to local community. That is South Africa, by the way. Our constitution, in which I proudly played a part, allows every province to have its own constitution. So far, only one has done that. That is the Western Cape.
Why don't we know that, Leon?
And it looks as if KZN might become the second province to have its own constitution. I don't know. People keep talking about, somehow there's an assumption, because under apartheid everything was one system, one size fits all. All blacks as follows, all whites as follows. And the idea that you could have different policies in Durban from what you have in Pietermaritzburg, and certainly different policies in KZN from what you get in the Eastern Cape and in Limpopo. This is what we have. Our constitution has that, allows for it. We have provincial powers, we have local powers which are constitutionalized, entrenched in the constitution. That's unusual. We are one of the world's true federations. And you say, why don't people know that?
Yeah.
It's my job.
Ignorant?
It's my job to get them to know that.
Yeah.
It's my job to get them to understand we live in a federation. We should have a federation, and we shouldn't have one-size-fits-all policies.
Tim, when you looked at the arrival of democracy in South Africa and Leon's participation in that era, what stood out for you?
People think of the most hallowed principle in the Constitution being democracy. But actually, there's a whole bunch of references to an open society, and I think that's one of the things that that was interesting about that time was how different influences from different philosophical schools made their way into the Constitution, and the open society idea was, of course, from Karl Popper's idea of of an interactive, free, individually based, responsible, interactive system, and really it's that idea that was very germane in the constitution making process, and it sparked its own really concrete programs. One of which was the idea of legislation having to be the consequence of participation by not only by politicians but by wider groups in the society. That is still, both of those ideas are actually still very present and very unique to South Africa. And lots of legislation that might have gone onto the books in South Africa ended up not being, accepted constitutionally precisely because the process of discussion prior to the adoption of the legislation wasn't conducted in a proper way. Most notably, I think we might have spent enormous amounts on a Russian nuclear system if it weren't for that. That's just one of the specific projects that was reversed legally, because the process of consultation was inadequate, and all of that came down to the contribution of the business community in general and Leon in particular, I think. So those were just a few examples. There was others too, of course.
Not your first book, Leon. You co-authored South Africa, the Solution, Pre-Democracy.
Yes, I think to this day it is the biggest selling non-fiction book on South Africa. Obviously books on, for example, biographies and so on will be bigger, but it was about 75,000 copies in South Africa and 20 or 25,000 elsewhere in the world, and also in various translations. And so, yes, it was an enormous success, and it was just me knowing and mixing with all of the political leaders at the time on the left and the right, white and black, and thinking, what might they all agree to? Is there something to which they could agree? These people who are mortal and bitter enemies and killing each other and fighting vicious fights. So, I feel the same way now about Israel and Ukraine and so on. I wish I were there saying, here's how you can solve the problem. You don't have to actually have a war. And so that's what we did. We just took issue by issue, one by one, what might all of the people across the spectrum agree to. So I, for example, did workshops and presentations to the ANC, the PAC, the National Party, the DA, the Progressive Party as it was then known, and so on. And in even the AWB, by the way, Eugene Terablanche got me there, and I spoke to them, and I said, okay, you want a separate state, a Boer state. I said, but the one thing you can't do is take your farm with you to wherever it's going to be. And you are Boer after all, which means farmers. And so I said to them, what you've got to do is say the majority of your own supporters and members are going to be living in the future quite soon under an ANC government. Now, what sort of constitution do you want when you're under the government of your enemy? And that I could have a discussion. They invited me back and we had lots of chats. And what about if the Constitution says... And I just completely redirected the discussion from a Boer state to a constitution with which they could live. That became then a different focus. And so that was my approach. And I would do that I did it with the ZAPA. I was very close and friendly. And PAC was actually the one I was closer to even than the ANC, because the PAC had a value system that valued the individual. You know, the black consciousness movement, saying that the individual is important and valuable. And that is very strangely enough, supposedly from the radical left, but it's actually libertarian and pro-market and classical liberal. And so it was actually quite easy to talk to PAC leaders, one of whom became the president of the Constitutional Court, was a deputy president of PAC at that time. And so, and I befriended these people and had their confidence. And I think they all just accepted that I was in good faith and didn't bat for any side. I batted for the country.
Tim, you've been in a unique position where you could go back and look at Leon's thoughts and policies and ideas 30-odd years ago and then compare them to your conversations with him 2025, 2026. How much has he changed?
I don't think he's changed at all. I mean, except of course that the solutions that we were discussing in the historical sort of context were kind of sort of politico-economic and constitutional, because that was the pressing issue of that time. Was how to reorganize the state in such a way that that individual freedom could flourish. And now the discussions are really largely economic, or they're political in a sense, but at root they're economic. And some of the things that were part of the original the solution, the original version, still sort of carried through to today without blinking. But there's quite a lot that just wasn't discussed in that time because it wasn't, the most sort of pressing issue at hand. So one of the issues I think that was that really has become much more sort of pertinent has been individual land title. That was a topic then which has just become a bigger topic now, and in the intervening period, the Free Market Foundation did an enormous amount of work on the topic. We think I don't know, and the interesting thing about titling is that a lot of municipalities and even provinces are now sort of thinking about it, and the idea of competitive ownership of state resources, which has for years been completely off the agenda, is now very firmly on the agenda, almost across the board.
Leon, property rights and freehold titling for the landless is a particular passion of yours, and there's this clause 25, property clause 25 that comes up. What is property clause 25?
Well, it says it's much longer, and I could go into the detail, but the core part of it is that nobody can be deprived of their land without fair compensation and due process. Two separate things which are somewhat technical, could also go into, but probably not this minute. And so that, unfortunately, says nobody can be deprived of property, speaks to people who already have it. And one of the things that I try to achieve, the fact that there is a property clause was largely work I did along with Cyril Ramaphosa and Lady Pandor and a few others. But I try to get it to focus more on black people. People are entitled to title, may not be deprived of title, because the latter presupposes they've already got it. That was a bit too subtle, and we had literally only a few days to draft the property clause 25. It was done under enormous haste for reasons that are somewhat lost in history.
Sure.
And so we couldn't get it down to a perfect clause, but it's pretty good, I think, as it is. And it does allow for the restitution or the confiscation of property that was wrongly acquired, for example, paid for by the state or given wrongly to some beneficiary of the state. So I think the clause is pretty good. It's not perfect. It's not what any of us particularly wanted, but it was the compromise in literally a few days of panic towards the end of the drafting process. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff that, for example, the railways. Why aren't the railways like the roads, where the state can own the roads but not the vehicles on them? Or if it has vehicles, it's just like any other road user, equal use of the roads. Now, that's after 100 years of railway monopoly, we now have competition. After 100 years of Eskom monopoly and monopsony, that means the only right to buy is monopsony, sell is monopoly, we now have competition. And so some of the most hallowed government institutions, like land ownership, it's quite interesting that the Mkonto and the EFF, their land policy is that all land should belong to the state.
Yeah.
Now, that's interesting because that was Verwoerd's view. So, is Malema a black Verwoerd that is saying, no, what the struggle of apartheid was to get land owned by the people who live on it. And that's in the Freedom Charter, and that's the policy which makes more sense and would liberate black people. It's not there for white people. The property clause is to protect black people from what happened to them under the travesty of apartheid land seizure and control.
Are you proud of our Constitution? Is it special?
I'm not one of these people who say that we've got the best constitution in the world, or that's just waffle. I think it's a good constitution. There's a lot in it that I would like to see different from what it is, and a lot that I think is fantastic and wonderful. For example, I would like to see the concurrent powers of local government and provinces should actually be exclusive powers. In other words, the concurrency is just silly. It was a kind of compromise. The ANC in the negotiations wanted more of a rigorous federation than, believe it, the Nats, who just wanted the same four provinces with virtually no powers, all central government powers. So we ended up with a pretty good federal constitution, but it could be a lot better. And I hope a time will come when it's revisited and they say, no, all concurrent powers should be exclusive powers at provincial and local level, and we should be a real functioning federation with diversity of policies within one country, many policies.
There's some catchphrases that I hear in South Africa that I find unsettling, like Mandela was a sellout. That's something that you hear from time to time. And the other one is is that the Constitution failed. You've got a completely different view on it. It's not that the Constitution failed. It's that we haven't learned how to use it.
Well, that is a lot that Tim, to his credit, dug into, is what in the Constitution has not happened. What is there that should have been implemented and hasn't been, and then also what should be there that isn't there. How would one improve it now? I'm not in favor of rewriting the Constitution at all. It has not failed. It has actually succeeded. It succeeded in preventing a civil war. It succeeded in bringing about prosperity. The GDP per capita of the average person, is inflation adjusted, has doubled. It's not bad. It's not good. It's not good enough. It should have at least quadrupled or been maybe 8 or 10 times more. But it's not bad. And in that sense, it succeeded. And we outperformed many countries in the world, roughly about a third or a half of them. And that's good. And we, in the beginning, in the early years, it was a great success. What went wrong was maybe people like me weren't, or Tim weren't doing our job properly in persuading people to adopt good policies with the constitution that allowed for it. That was so it hasn't failed. And was Mandela a sellout? Well, if you're a libertarian, you would say he was a sellout because we didn't end up with complete personal liberty. If you're a communist, you would say he was a sellout because you didn't end up with communism. It's just a silly cliche.
Yeah.
Mandela was a sellout. I mean, that's just people who say that, it's loose talk and it's frankly rubbish. It doesn't deserve being taken seriously.
Writing a book of this nature, Tim, does it consume you? I mean, is it all you think about 24 hours a day?
It does, yeah. It's, writing books, it's a little bit of a mountain because it's solitary and progressive, and you don't think you'll ever finish. And then when you do, you suddenly realize you've written too much. And you do, think about it a lot. And it's a very personal process. And I'm so thrilled that. That Leon and Bon Posmo, who was really the sponsor of the book, think it's okay. It means a lot to me. And I think it's and I'm hoping that it will quietly, in the way that interesting books do, change the minds of people over time. As it did mine. And that's always the best thing I think about a book is if it confirms your opinions, then why read it? If it changes your mind, then you've gone through an interesting process, and I hope that's what happens.
How has your mind changed?
Well, I think a lot of the specifics about concretely. What South Africa could be doing or should be doing right now, those sorts of things. I hadn't delved in them in kind of sufficient depth. I think that's the one thing. And the other thing was that there's I think South Africa really has an urgency deficit. People have made this point before that that South Africa is not grasping the nettles firmly and decisively enough and quickly enough, and it just reinvigorated my sense that that's what we should be doing.
What's your favorite part of the book, Leon?
I suppose the favorite part is firstly the description of the old Free Market Foundation and the role I played, and that's good for my little fragile ego. The part that's most valuable is part 4. It's in 4 parts, and part 4 is the
solution continued,
and that's what Tim got excited by. It was his idea. It was never thought of originally, and Tim said, let's not just focus on the past. Let's talk about the future. Where should it go? And he's done a fantastic job. I must tell you that Tim spent many hours in discussion with me, raising every conceivable policy question, everything from how to fix potholes to what our foreign policy with Israel should be or whatever. And he wrote an enormous amount. And in the end, the biggest decision and the toughest decision was what to omit, because we had to just telescope down on a few issues. So there were some big issues, tough issues, health, energy, transport. And then there were some relatively minor issues. What about this? What about that? But it covers many of the big issues. And Tim did a fantastic job at capturing them, summarizing them, and deciding what to omit. That was the difficult part. I had difficulty with that. There was stuff that I thought, we must cover this, we must go into that. And Tim was a ruthless taskmaster at that stage and said, no, part 4 has a limited size and we'll stick to that.
Also, your favorite part of the book, Tim?
Well, the thing I really, exactly the same. I would say the thing I really think how you sort of look at it after it's finished, and you think there's things that you missed. And one of the things that I think that I missed was just Leon's sense of humor. You can see it in parts because we talk about Leon's objection to roadblocks, which doesn't sound like a big issue, but it was very funny. And but Leon really does have a very fun sense of humor, and I just hope that comes across, and I fear that it doesn't come across sufficiently. That's my regret.
You talk about getting angry in the shower. You spoke about that a little earlier on, and I'm thinking of you. Well, I'm not really thinking of you in the shower, but I'm imagining you. I'm imagining you in the shower after a busy day chatting with Leon and putting this book together. And I'm trying to find a single moment that may have stood out or made you go, wow, or was there?
Not in that sort of sense. The depth and consequence of individual property and land title. I'd always known that in principle, but the power of it, the consequences of it, those that I think is really. How disappointing it is that it hasn't gone further, in 30 years. Those are, Leon, just correct me. I think there's at least 100,000 property owners, but presumably many more, that have got title, because of the Free Market Foundation's campaign and the Freedom Foundation's campaign going forward. But really, a lot more work needs to be done on that. And if anything stands out, is that this is a campaign that has fabulous consequences and great legs, and is really urgent.
Leon has a very interesting way of getting you to see his point. And I'm sure you experienced that in your conversations with him. But I recall a drive that I took with him once to the East Rand, to Germiston. And he took me to an informal settlement called Marathon in Delport, and we spent the day there. And I came back a completely different person when it came to my thinking. And just spending enough time with Leon and him showing you, think further than the headline, think further than today. Brought great value to my life when it comes to critical thinking. Did it change yours at all?
Yeah, oh no, totally. That's a great description. One of the things was I've always been, as a kind of urban South African, I must say I'm a little bit prejudiced against tribalism. I've always disliked tribalism, and I've always had prejudices about tribal authority. Because I've always assumed that one of the big roadblocks to individual land ownership in South Africa has been traditional leaders. But actually, this is not the case. And, Leon said, it differs because traditional leaders differ and their prescriptions differ. And some traditional leaders are completely open and welcome the idea of individual land ownership and completely understand it. And, I hadn't even thought that before. But there's some who are against it. But nobody's engaged, individually traditional leaders to say, this might be good for the people, and traditional leaders, they are quite often they are not overseers. They are the voice of the community. They are a democratic form in their own right. I'm sure that's what you saw and what I've come to appreciate too.
When you read the book, your eyes are opened to so many different issues. And Leon, my personal experience with you is that that's what you seem to do with the people around you. You help people see clearer. Do you do that on purpose?
Oh, no.
Is it intentional?
No,
do you go to sleep at the end of the night and say, right, score one, I converted another one today?
No. I'm more interested in converting myself. I am... Tim mentioned Karl Popper, the philosopher, and one of his philosophies is he's considered the father of the scientific method, which is that you falsify, you don't prove. Now, that's a very, very important insight. You've got to think that everything you think could be wrong. And what you do is you seek verification at the moment, but in fact, he says you shouldn't. You should seek falsification. And this is the scientific method, is you can have an hypothesis of evolution or whatever, and that's why the gravity, etc., are called theories, because the philosophy of science says you always have to have the possibility that you're wrong, and the most exciting thing is to discover that you're wrong, not that you're right, is falsification, realizing that you had a wrong idea. And that's what I try to do. So with other people, if they have what seem to me to be wrong ideas, I might engage you or Tim or somebody, but I'm partly just engaging myself. I'm trying to test my own position on the issue and then say, for example, traditional leaders. Are traditional leaders against individual ownership of title? I thought, well, did anyone ask them? So I went and did that. I went around to... I've visited maybe 50, 60 tribal authorities and traditional leaders and said, are you against title? The overwhelming majority said, no, we're in favor of title.
Wow.
And so,
you wouldn't expect that.
Yes, I know. So then I had to correct one of my errors. And that's exciting, when you find out you're wrong, not when you find out you're right. And that's what I try to do with other people as well. Try to get them to have the excitement of discovering they were wrong about something. And that's, for me, Popperian, Hayekian, all part of the so-called Austrian school of economic thought, the scientific method of logic and philosophy, or the philosophy of science. And that, to me, is what I want to do. So if you, for example, say to me, the earth is flat, I don't immediately say that's a lot of bollocks, that's nonsense. I say, wow, that's interesting. Why do you think that? Now, I happened to bump into a chap called Roger, a nice friend of mine in a little town called Wokkerstrom, who's been an international pilot.
Yes.
His co-pilot on many flights believed that the earth is flat. Now, do you want to be in that plane, flying with a co-pilot who says the earth is flat? And he, Roger, very, very lovely, bright guy, he spent hours discussing whether the earth is flat or round or orb-shaped with this chap. And he said it was just fascinating learning how a very bright, very sophisticated person could have that view. Now, if you say to me you think the earth is flat, my immediate thought is, gee, I want to understand. How did you get that view? Explain it to me. What do you think about photographs of the Earth from space? Or, there was no moon landing, for example. I don't say the person who says that is stupid or idiotic. I'm more interested in finding out how do they reach that conclusion. And in the process, many of them would change their mind and say, no, actually, I was wrong. Or I would change my mind and say I was wrong, or we both go away, hopefully thinking, having learned something, the stuff we didn't think before. We don't all have to think the same, but as Tim says, if you disagree with me, you're wrong.
Tim, what's next? What's next?
Well, I actually have. I mean, one of the difficulties about writing this book was that I actually have a full-time job. I'm actually a working journalist, a working stiff, and I must tell you, it's quite absorbing. Because nothing ever stands still. I don't know whether you've noticed. There's quite a lot of stuff going around the world at the moment, as there has been for for all time. So keeping track of all of that is it's a full-time job, literally. But I will write. I do want to write a couple more books, and I've got a couple of ideas that are in the sort of process of conception.
Well, we wish you all the best with the next one and the next one. And thank you for joining us today. Tim Cohen, author of Louw, A Legacy of Solutions. Well, I hope you enjoyed this chat, Leon. We had a couple of laughs, but there's some serious stuff that sits at the foundation. What would your message be to anyone watching this podcast who's going to go out to exclusive books or get hold of Daily Maverick and get a copy? What would you like to say to them?
I would like them to be critical. I don't like people who get into an echo chamber and stay there and just, I want an open mind. I want this inquiring mind, questioning everything. And, for example, let's take the big media thing at the moment, the Epstein files, so-called. I'm just shocked by how few people question. They just buy the sensational media line. They presume it all to be true. Nobody says, how true is it? And is it really true? And who really went there? And what did they really do? Rather than if you're named in the Epstein file, you somehow then are automatically a pervert of some sort. And so I would like to see it just on that, because it's a highly topical issue, or the Iranian-Israel-US war. Question. Am I sure my position on this is correct? My bias, my knee-jerk reaction, my preference. Examine. And probably end up in a world of less certainty, which for some people is uncomfortable. They want the Linus blanket of certainty. But on the other hand, having an open mind is quite exciting. It's liberating to sit there like now. Now, for example, I would encourage you to do the craziest thing in the world. Go and find out what the scientists who believe in the Flat Earth Society say, or the people who say that 9/11 wasn't a terrorist day, or whatever. Look into them. And it doesn't mean you get persuaded. I don't buy into these conspiracy theories. But I find out what they are, and I'm intrigued and fascinated by how brilliantly some of them are argued, even though in the end I conclude they're not valid or not legitimate.
Louw, A Legacy of Solutions is on sale now. It's a fascinating account on the remarkable life of Louw. And you may just find yourself becoming a convert or a believer in free market principles and the decentralization of power. I know I certainly have been influenced by Leon's thoughts, words, and Tim's book. Tim, thank you very much for joining us.
Not at all. Great pleasure. That was too much fun.
And Leon, as always, thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Tim, who's to have someone of Tim's eminence, as possibly the top financial journalist in South Africa, editor, or at least one of the, handful of the top 5 or whatever. But Tim is an extraordinary intellect, extraordinary person, and to have him write this book about me is intimidating and a great honor.
Our last thank you is for you. For watching the podcast, and a reminder to keep looking out for more Through the Liberty Lens with Leon Louw podcasts on this platform. There'll be one approximately every week, so keep looking out for the Through the Liberty Lens podcasts on this channel. Lots of exciting conversations to come.